You've heard the famous line, by the time the truth puts on its pants, the lie has traveled around the world. Well, that was said not in the age of AI, that was said decades ago when it was things like the telegraph that took things around the world. Now it's everybody's a telegraph operator, everybody's a television owner, everybody is a broadcaster.
Welcome to another episode of CAPTivated, a podcast hosted by the Center for American Political History, Media and Technology at Purdue University. In each episode, we examine a specific facet of our digital public sphere, how it works, and how we got here. We are here to help you sort through the noise. I'm Hannah.
I'm Sage.
And I'm Julius. Our guest for today's episode is Sree Sreenivasan. It's hard to know where to begin with introducing Sree, but I'll start by saying Sree began his career as a tech journalist. He spent 20 years as a professor of journalism at Columbia, specializing in new media. Since then, he's been the chief digital officer for New York City, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Columbia University.
Now, you may be thinking, what is a chief digital officer exactly? Well, we'll get into that in the conversation.
Sree's also the CEO and founder of Digimentors, a consulting company about how to use digital, social, and AI technology. That's all pretty impressive, but you should also know that Sree co-founded the South Asian Journalists Association and the Online News Association. In 2004, Newsweek named him one of the 20 most influential young South Asians, along with Norah Jones, M. Night Shyamalan, and another name you might have heard of, Kamala Harris.
We wanted to talk to Sree because for over 30 years, he's been on the real bleeding edge of thinking about journalism and tech. He's also been teaching journalists how to use new technology. So in the 1990s, you could find him doing seminars about texting. And in the early 2000s, he was teaching people how to use email.
More recently, the New York Observer even called him the Twitter tutor. And I think he's one of the most insightful people out there about both the potential and problems with AI for our democracy.
Like we always do, we asked Sree what he thinks is the biggest problem with the digital public sphere. He thinks it's misinformation. We had a really wide-ranging conversation about it.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that Sree is somebody who comes off as a techno-optimist, meaning somebody who believes that technology basically can make the world a better place. However, it's becoming harder and harder to make that case now because of the way that the Silicon Valley bros are behaving.
Yeah, you're definitely not going to come away from this conversation thinking that Sree is a fan of Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk. Not at all. But in being a techno-optimist and someone that is really excited about technology, Sree, I think, makes a really good case for one of the ways that you can become more informed and more technologically and media literate is to just experiment and play around with these things yourself. Every time there's a new technology, a new platform, Sree is someone who is out there just seeing how it works. And he suggests that's one of the things that we should all be doing too.
Yeah, he talked about how you can test AI by asking it really important questions about things you know well, and you can be able to gauge its answers and test its validity. One of the interesting things that he found when he put in his own information is that it told him that he was dead.
So, since Sree seems to be quite alive and kicking, we started out by asking him about his life and his unusually global upbringing.
I was born in Tokyo. My dad had no problem picking me out in the window. He said, the brown one is mine. I lived then after that in Bhutan, in Moscow at the height of the Soviet Union. I used to speak fluent Russian. I was a full communist. And I used to come home saying Lenin is God. And then I ended up in New York. I started saying John Lennon is God and became a full capitalist. I went to high school in Fiji, which is exactly as wonderful as it sounds, and then went to college in India. And I came to America for grad school and stayed here. So that was my second round in the US. I went to Columbia Journalism School to study journalism, and it was still very early days. This was 1992. Word processing was the new technology. And on the television side, we were using high 8 videotapes, which are a smaller format tape that you could use, like what you would have in your camcorder when there were camcorders. I told my parents when I was 12 I was going to be a journalist, and they started crying immediately because no Indian parent wants that. They want engineer, doctor, lawyer, anything but journalist. And I knew this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And that's how I started my global career.
So I'm really curious, as somebody who's lived in India, and I know, it's a doctor and engineer thing, What made you so interested in journalism to begin with?
I loved to write. I loved the ability to connect with people. I won a storytelling contest in fifth grade in New York City at PS6. It was long before storytelling was anything to do with journalism. No one had ever used that phrase. Now we use it all the time, and storytelling is so important. There was a story in the New York Times about my work at the Met where they said so many stories to tell for the Met's digital chief. And so that idea of being able to tell stories, I think, was very important. I'm sure I was also impacted by all the journalists in the media who were visible to someone like me, including Peter Parker, who was, of course, Spider Man, Clark Kent, who was Superman. And let's not forget, Kermit the Frog was sometimes a journalist. He would wear a trench coat and a fedora. And so when you add them all up, I was exposed to a lot of media folks as a kid. And I knew I wanted to do that. I was also interested in advertising because I loved the way that ads told stories too. And I've always thought that if I didn't go into the work that I did, I would have been in advertising. But then that leads you to marketing. And in my current avatar, I do a lot of ads and marketing and social media. All of this is all connected in a way they were not at all back in the 1980s.
So you were always you were always like seeing into the future there.
Often by accident, but yes.
So I just wanted to go back quickly to this idea of being the chief digital officer, like being the head of digital. It's a little bit like, you know, in the Barbie movie, like they say Ken's job is beach. Like Sree's job is digital. Can you just paint us a little bit of a picture of what a digital officer is? What is being the head of digital?
Sure. I was chief digital officer 3 times, and I call that job chief listening officer as well as chief digital officer, the person whose job in the organization is to listen for new ideas, trends, tools, things happening so that your organization can stay abreast of what's happening, stay ahead, not just survive, but thrive. And at Columbia, when I was chief digital officer, I was the first one there, was to think about the future of education. This was part of the great MOOC crisis of 2012. Some of your readers will blissfully be unaware of this. MOOC was massive open online courses where you could take classes, and you still can, at Coursera, edX, places MIT, Harvard, where you can take classes with 50,000 other students. And places like Columbia were really worried about what this means for education. Then I was recruited by the Met to be its first chief digital officer. And there we're working on the future of culture. How do we continue to engage audiences, young and old, around museums? One of the things I learned is that there are people who live across the street from the Met. There are people who live around the Met. There are people who live in New York City who almost never go because they're busy, because the Met's too crowded. Whenever anybody asks me, what is the biggest competition for a place like the Met? Is it the Guggenheim? Is it the British Museum? Is it the Louvre? And I would say it's none of those things. It's Candy Crush. It's Netflix. It's life in 2026. I was there 10 years ago now, but this idea that we're not competing with each other as museums, we're competing against attention, against time, against the busyness of modern life. That's how I used to see it. And then finally, I was the chief digital officer of New York City, working on the future of cities and citizens. But I learned so much at every place I've been, and I'm grateful for every opportunity.
Yeah, that's quite an incredible career. And I guess your job very much there is being, as I said, on the cutting edge, on the bleeding edge. Okay, so as someone who is on the bleeding edge of thinking about tech, we wanted to ask you, what do you see as one of the biggest problems facing our digital public sphere today?
I will say one thing in my defense is, because I am tagged with being too digital by people all the time, that for the last 10 years, I've been publicly, in a kind of insane way, reading the print New York Times aloud on social media for 10 years. As a show, we call the New York Times Read Along. We also have done the Washington Post Read Along, the Toronto Globe and Mail Read Along, the Khaleej Times in Dubai. We read the print paper on social media, and we have guests, including some fabulous journalists from the New York Times, as well as authors, writers, all kinds of folks. Harlan Coben, the writer who seems to have at least 3-4 shows on Netflix all the time and 2-3 books on the top of the bestseller list. With Joe Stiglitz, the Nobel-winning economist. We use this, and people say, why do you do this? I say I do it because I love print. There's something magical about print, and print can be a newspaper, a magazine, a book. We still subscribe to 2-3 print magazines. And when you see your name in print, when you read an article in print, it hits your brain in a different way than it does digitally. So I still channel that love for print, and we still do this with the digital stuff, all to the point that we want to fight misinformation, disinformation. I tell people, you don't have to subscribe to the New York Times. Subscribe to something. Subscribe to a local publication that is covering your town, your neighborhood, your region, because that's so important. So when you talk about what is problematic, I would say knowing what's real, knowing what is useful, knowing what's accurate, knowing where things are going is so difficult. I'll take a minute to just talk about AI slop, a word that's come out of nowhere and everyone's embraced it. I think it's a very good word. But I'd say what it has done is that now anything you see online, you have to question, is it real or is it AI? But it's something I've been saying for 25 years, that if you see anything online, if it's too good to be true or too bad to be true, it probably is. What I mean by that is you've all gotten these emails where it'll say, my cousin and his friend went out dancing in New York City and they woke up in a tub of, anybody remember this? A tub of ice with a note saying your kidney's been stolen. Like, this was something that would make the rounds repeatedly. We had various foreign potentates offering to make you rich by giving you money. We had all kinds of scams and schemes all over the internet long before AI. So this is not an AI issue, but the quality of the AI stuff is so high and getting better and better each day, that's very difficult for people to know what they're looking at. I use a tool called Sora, which I'm sure you folks have seen. I had me climbing the Burj Khalifa, and many people say, oh, that's fake. And so many other people say, oh my God, where did you have time? Aren't you scared? How did you go up there? And this is the reality where, yes, many people can tell something's fake, but there are so many other people who cannot. The slop stuff it's a word that's easy to dismiss it, that we should be careful about that.
So in thinking about this danger of seeing something and thinking it's real and passing it on, I came across an article from 2009 from the New York Times about how journalism is using the internet. It tells this story about how you found out that Michael Jackson had died because you saw people retweeting a post from TMZ. You talk about how you were judging the quality of the information based on the people who shared it and therefore their evaluation of TMZ. And they quote you as saying to your students, anytime you decide to forward something, you're making a big decision. You're putting your reputation in real life and in cyberspace on the line. So that's back in 2009 when Twitter was only 3 years old. Obviously, 2 decades later, we're in a wildly different time now. How would you think about that now? How would you update that advice?
Oh, I haven't thought of that article in a while. This was minutes after I had gotten into a subway in New York going uptown, and I saw the TMZ news, and I knew this is 100% true if TMZ reports it. Sounds ridiculous because TMZ is so outlandish and out there and chasing people down. You know, all the stuff TMZ does. But I knew this was real because this is like the Washington Post saying the president has resigned. They will not get it wrong, because if they get that wrong, they're out of business. So I knew that. And I said out loud, oh my God, Michael Jackson's dead. And immediately everybody in the subway stopped and everybody turned to look at me like, what are you talking about? And this is a subway heading uptown in New York, where we have folks who love Michael Jackson, as we do in Midtown and downtown New York. But this was a moment where I realized that I could have been wrong and that would have been bad. But I knew that they were right.
And in terms of thinking about trusting information before you pass it on, I think that is even more so today a problem. You've spoken elsewhere about, I think you called it WhatsApp University. which is
Oh, that's not my term. Hannah will know that that's something that they say about India. WhatsApp University is the fact that they believe they're learning through WhatsApp forwards, which is the equivalent of email forwards, equivalent of your crazy uncle sending you things on Facebook. But the power of the forward is so strong in India. And you feel like you're learning things about money, about health, about politics, about history. And in India and in places like that, it's weaponized because here you make a mistake about something, you might get ostracized, you might get called out, you might get canceled even. But we've seen multiple things happen in India, in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, where these tools have been used to generate such a backlash that people are then killed or injured as a result. So for all the horrific things happening in American and Western social media, that is typically not the first thing you worry about. But in those countries, it is. And we can blame the people of India, the people of Myanmar, the people of Sri Lanka, but they're not the ones to blame. The ones to blame are the people in Silicon Valley who were specifically warned about these things, who were told about these things, and still didn't care. I met people in Sri Lanka who said we had begged the folks at Facebook to please add more than 2 moderators for the entire country when you know that Sri Lanka has a history of ethnic, civil, brutal warfare. And they didn't care, they didn't listen.
So the moderators, I'm thinking in WhatsApp, how would the moderators work if you have your family group that you're posting the stuff that uncle thinks it's the right thing, right? And so it's a really tricky question to battle misinformation because it's fragmented, the chambers where people talk, right?
100%. And one of the things that they have done is reduce the velocity and the ability to share WhatsApp as much as they used to. You could forward things unlimited times. Now, there are certain messages that can be only forwarded to 5 people instead of 5,000 people. One of the things they used to do is you have a picture of something really offensive or incorrect, and somebody's correcting it and saying, hey, folks, don't share this because this is problematic, or correcting the information, that would get separated because it couldn't be sent together. And now you can send it together. And at the server level, they are certainly aware of what's happening in these tools, and they need to do much more than they're doing. Partly because, I mean, I like to blame a lot of blame on Mr. Zuckerberg because he does own the biggest of the tools: Facebook, WhatsApp, Messenger, right? Instagram. You combine that's each of them has, I believe now, at least 2 billion people. So we're talking about scale, reach at unprecedented levels.
Yeah, Sree, it would be great to hear because I think I could hear some audience members asking, like, how does these crises happening in Myanmar, happening in India, happening in Sri Lanka, happening in America, where misinformation is leading to all these cascading problems? How is that all land at the feet of Mark Zuckerberg, at the feet of Elon Musk, at the feet of all these Silicon Valley figures? Can you dig a little bit deeper into how they are the impetus for this issue?
It's amazing that I haven't mentioned the name Elon Musk yet, because you will see me rise up out of my chair in anger about Elon, who competes in my mind with Donald Trump for being the worst human on the planet. And the fact that they found each other is just poetically beautiful and awful and horrible at the same time. I'm very proud that I wrote in 2018 in my newsletter, which I hope people will check out. I wrote that Mr. Musk should get off Twitter because it is bad for his other businesses that he's on Twitter. He doesn't know how to control himself. He should not be on Twitter. Little did I know that not only would he stay on Twitter, he would buy the damn thing. It was already a problematic platform. I used to talk about it all the time, and made it much, much, much worse. It was impossible to make it worse. And I said foolishly, oh, $44 billion, what a waste. No, I was wrong. $44 billion, the greatest bargain in history. He stole an election. He stole a country. He bought a presidency for $44 billion. That is nothing. When you ask Julius, this is what I mean. This is at the feet of people like this because they allowed humanity and the users to use their tools in ways that they were originally not intended. Along the way, you've also seen when we say that social media corrupts the minds of young people. I wrote a column about how it corrupts the minds of old people. We only think about social media problems with young people. I think about old people as well, but also how social media ate the brains of Zuckerberg and Musk and other people who these guys were, and mostly guys, of course, were people who had good ideas, good intentions. But when you take the algorithms and the tools that they built, you take the incentives of money and politics, they themselves got transformed, right? We can say, oh, some uneducated person in particular state got blown up by social media, but it happened to these people themselves. I have spent time with Zuckerberg. I have spent time with several of the Silicon Valley Mughals. Mughal is an Indian word, as you'll notice. The empire ruled India, and from that we get the Mughal term. But we have seen what they are able to do and what happened to them. That's kind of, in a way, really sad. Elon Musk had very good intentions with the electric car. He wanted to help save the planet. And so many people bought those cars, right? They now have these things saying, I bought my Tesla before Elon went crazy. Please don't attack my Tesla, all of that. But he had really good intentions. But he then has gone on to support in Donald Trump and the GOP every single political opportunity to make the planet less safe. His idea that we should all move to Mars tells you he doesn't care about this planet. He wants to burn this planet down and go to Mars. That is a problem. So my last thought about this, because otherwise you have to stop me, otherwise I will only talk about Musk and will get aggressively more angry. And by the way, Bill Gates sainted in so many ways, thanks to the Epstein files and some of what happened before with Melinda. We know how problematic he is and what he is now accused of and what has come to light, just awful stuff. But it puts people like me and others who believe that technology can be used for progress, that technology can be used for good, that technology can make the world a better, safer, more friendly place. It's almost impossible to now prove that to anybody. The way I was trusting Bill Gates's guidance during COVID to say vaccines matter, now all those people can throw it back right on us. We have to sort of take it.
I think this is a great transition for us to start hearing from your perspective what kind of solutions we might have. Because as you laid it out, and you tell me if I'm wrong with anything, that there is obviously this source of the problem, which are these major billionaires in Silicon Valley creating these mechanisms and systems of AI use, of social media, of digital media that is fomenting, this kind of misinformation, this misguidance, this ignorance that's building in the community that's really leading to real world violence. And that at some point, that violence, someone has to be held accountable for it. And so it would be good to hear kind of what your solutions are to this problem that we've been talking about.
Oh, it's much easier to just point out the problems. Forget the solutions. Who cares, right? That's so quaint. In a serious way, I think that the more we understand what's happening with these tools, the more successful we're going to be in dealing with all of this, right? So I think that we have seen there are various efforts now to correct some of this, to find a path forward. And I don't think it's that obvious or that available. What we knew as things that were going to be forever, in the correct direction, that's obviously changing. And a lot of that has to do with AI and the speed and rate with which things change. We're talking soon after Sam Altman had an interview in New Delhi, said something outrageous where people were talking, as you all know, we have to come up with $1 trillion of renewable energy, fuel all this AI stuff. And he's asked about that. And he basically says, that's no different than what it costs to feed a child till the age of 20 where they're smart enough to do something. Like, where is the empathy? Where's the humanity of these people? And they're the ones running Silicon Valley and therefore running the planet. That's why I was so happy that DeepSeek exists, because it just shows that you can have other places where technology can rise up and have an impact, or Spotify coming out of Scandinavia. I think it's really important that we have that, because these few men and women in Silicon Valley, again, sadly, too many men who are just deciding everyone's future is, I think it's really problematic. We need to encourage more voices coming out of other places. In one of my presentations, or in all my presentations, I'm often asked, who's going to win, Team Human or Team AI, or the robots? And I say, I'm optimistic that Team Human will prevail. But the question then comes, and somebody asked me this, I wasn't ready for it. They said, what kind of human? Will it be more Elon Musk's and Mark Zuckerberg's and people like that, the tech bros, Peter Thiel, awful, awful man? Or will it be a better type of human? But it can't happen unless we change the economics, the incentives, the abilities for people in other places to rise and do new, better, important things.
Sree, I wanted to just hark back to the DeepSeek, the Chinese LLM. Can you talk a little bit about it more for our listeners and explain why that's a good thing?
I was in India in early January last year doing a series of AI talks when out of the blue came this announcement that a Chinese company called DeepSeek has created a model that is now available worldwide, that they built orders of magnitude cheaper and orders of magnitude faster than OpenAI and these other tools. Just the fact that it wasn't American, I thought was a good thing. We can endlessly debate whether these things are all controlled by the Chinese Communist Party and what that means. Part of me would rather have things controlled by the Chinese Communist Party than by Larry Ellison. Oh my God. And whoever is Trump's closest buddy, that he then hands over the keys of the most important communications tool to these people. I didn't have problems with the way TikTok was. It was predictable. Now they're going to put their thumb on the scale and change the way that people see TikTok. So I hope that at least gives you some background. But I have to say, what I tell everyone, when you see a new platform, you test it by going in and typing something you know a lot about. In the cases of all of you, you know a lot about communications, whatever your PhD is in, ask a question about that. And then you'll see, do they know something or not? Or just type in your own name and see what it comes back. So in my case, I typed in my name and it came back, and I would say it was going along pretty well. It started by saying I was born on September 9th, 1966 in New Delhi. I was born in Japan, and it was 4 years later in 1970. So I was okay. And then it went on and on. And then only later did I realize it was all in the past tense. So I didn't understand. And sure enough, we came to a spot where it said Sree died in September 2020 during the pandemic. And a lot of people mourned his passing in the digital and cultural communities. And I thought that was very sweet. But I'm kind of offended that none of you showed up at the funeral.
I just didn't get it in the mail. I didn't get to me.
You didn't get the email. But that, I mean, so even this model that I'm praising thought I was dead. And it's not about me, but I've had an online footprint since 1995 or 96. So I've been out there. So I'm so easy to find, my Wikipedia, etc. If they get that stuff wrong, then what else do they get wrong is the question.
So in thinking about how individual people should be tackling this problem of how to recognize misinformation, I know you've been a big advocate of media literacy. Do you have any kind of tips and tricks? And I should just say, one of the easiest ways you can make yourself more media literate is by subscribing to Sree's Sunday Note, his newsletter, which is a kind of deep dive every week into where digital media meets our analog world. But it's also got lots of tips and tricks, and it's a really good resource for thinking about media literacy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, you folks can find it on Substack. It's at sreenet.substack.com. I've been writing for 8 years now, and I do it because I can then go back to my roots of journalism and reporting and writing. But also what you said, we all have to do our part. I beg all my cousins and friends to, every time your other cousin sends something stupid into a group, you have to correct it, embarrass them enough that they will think twice before hitting forward. As we think about what can we do, how do we fight this stuff, what do? We have to experiment, try to understand the tools in front of us. What is new, what's exciting, what's good, what's bad, and how can we do things with that? The new iPhone that I have, one of the things it has is a cool thing where you can shoot a video with a front and back camera at the same time. And therefore, that adds a lot of credibility to the videos you shoot. So I'm interviewing somebody or I'm showing a fire. You can see me, I'm shooting the fire in one direction, but the back camera works. So that puts me in that spot. Can it be faked? Of course. But when it's built in to the DNA of that camera and that tool, that's a really good thing. Some of you will remember that this sounds vaguely like a tool that blew up during COVID, super popular, called Be Real, and where it had the front and back camera and people loved it, and that disappeared. So you can learn from these tools and see what can we do to make something more authentic, to help people understand that this is real and this is not.
I think that one of the problems we're dealing with here is also motivated reasoning and polarization, right? Even when things are not real, people may not really care. One example being there's some social scientists who did a study during Trump's inauguration. There was this photo shoot of how many people came to the first inauguration in 2017. And then I think he compared that to Obama's, which was visibly much bigger crowds. And then they went and asked people, Republicans and Democrats, which photo has the biggest crowds? It was a shocking number of Republicans said that the Trump picture had the bigger crowds. It's not just about recognizing what's right or wrong. It's about thinking about what we want to believe, right?
Well, you were told as children, believe your eyes, believe your ears. But how can you when things can be so easily manipulated? And then what you're talking about is a slightly different problem where people will believe what they want to believe. You could put any kind of information in front of them, any kind of facts, and they just won't believe it because they know in their heart of hearts or what they see in the media, all of that is what drives them. And because things are changing so quickly, every day there's news that's shocking to us, that people are inured to this, right? They just don't believe it. And this idea, for example, that there is a group of people, rich people, who are running sex trafficking rings and running the world, it turned out to be true. The people who were doing it weren't the people necessarily who were being accused of it, might have even been the other side, but it doesn't matter, right? Because once you've broken that dam of this is something we believe and this is what we consider to be true, once that's gone, then you cannot bring it back in any way. We in journalism try things like corrections, fact checking. All of that is so problematic because it's so hard for people to believe it. You've heard the famous line, by the time the truth puts on its pants, the lie has traveled around the world. Well, that was said not in the age of AI. That was said decades ago when it was things like the telegraph that took things around the world. Now it's everybody's a telegraph operator, everybody's a television owner, everybody is a broadcaster.
And I think especially with what you were talking about earlier about the difficulty of getting people's attention, it's one thing to get the attention for the first incorrect or unreal thing, but then to additionally get attention for the debunking and for the fact checking. That's exactly what's happening there. It's a problem of attention and sustained attention. But on the topic of attention, if our listeners had only a couple of seconds to listen to what you have to say and you were to give them 3 takeaways, what would be your 3 main takeaways to give to our listeners?
Well, I think the fact that you have to own your role in all of this. By participating in social media, you're part of the problem. Every day that you're on it, every time you pick up your phone instead of doing something else, every time you are doom scrolling, you are part of the problem. So therefore, every single time you don't pick up your phone, every single time you read a book, every time you pick up a magazine or even watch Netflix, rather than participate in this, you are making a difference. So know that. That would be one thing. The other is that the speed of this stuff is changing so quickly, and we have to stay literate about the technology, literate about new problems coming down so that people can help you understand. And finally, I would say we are responsible for the people who run our lives in terms of politicians, and we must all participate and not just say, well, It's too late. I'm just one vote. It doesn't matter. What you have seen in the United States, the extreme damage being done in the US by Donald Trump, is from an election margin that's 1.5%. You would think, if you didn't know, he won 60%, 70% of the vote. He won by 40 points. No, he won by 1.5 points, less than 50% of the vote. The third smallest victory for any president who won both the Electoral College and the popular vote, the 11th smallest in history in all 47 previous presidents, the smallest victory. From that, they're claiming the mandate. From that, they are causing havoc all over the world. And because now the world is all alliances and connections, even if you don't live in the US, you now must care about what's happening here and hold your leaders to hold their feet to the fire to say, we're all in this together in this awful, terrible way. We're also talking after the birth anniversary of John Lewis. We were talking Black History Month. John Lewis, a great congressional leader who had this idea that you should make good trouble, that you should speak up, speak out. Look at the people of Minnesota, how they're fighting back and what they're doing. We should all be doing that in our own countries, in our own cities, be ready to fight back. He had a great line. He said, we all arrived on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. And I feel like we're like that in the entire planet is in one boat being run by 4, 5, 10 terrible Silicon Valley bros, 4, 5, 6, 7 terrible world leaders. And we are kind of adrift on the ship, but we have to fight back and take responsibility ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message, advocating against apathy, really. So yeah, thank you for that, Sree. Before we let you go, we would love to know about your media diet. So you've been talking a lot about finding who to trust, educating yourself on what you read, what you listen to. What we like to frame it as, what's your meat and two veg? What's your main news diet? And then we'll also ask you about your junk food, what you do for fun, and your palate cleanser.
Wow, that's making me hungry. Let's see. I'm still on X, where a lot of people have left. I know some of you are there, Hannah's there, but I'm still there. People ask me why, and I say, if I'm unhappy with my electricity company, I don't boycott it. I try to make it better. And that's why I'm there. But I also love being able to say terrible things about Elon Musk on his own platform to his face. Not that he'll ever see it. I'm throttled on there. I'm blocked, and my influence is much reduced since he took over, but that's okay. That's his prerogative. So I still have hope that someday he'll get bored and move on. And so I still read a lot on Twitter. And because of the things I read, the algorithm now only feeds me mostly stuff I want to see, stuff that is helpful in the work I do. So for the most part, not always, I read lots of news, a lot of newsletters. I have things just kind of coming at me all the time. I also have a lot of friends and acquaintances around the world who forward me things. And I tell them, if you see something useful, helpful, just forward it to me. You cannot over communicate with me unless you're sending me junk. But if you send me good stuff, I want it because I'm looking for things to forward. I'm looking for things to share. I'm looking for new ideas. That idea of chief listening officer, I have to be my own chief listening officer. So I have to listen to other things. My family will tell you I watch way too much Fox News. And I do it because I understand a little bit about what's happening in the world because of that. I teach a class on the evils of Rupert Murdoch. And I knew days after Obama was elected, let alone inaugurated, that he was going to be in deep trouble and not able to do the things he wanted because on Fox, you could see the anger of the white nationalism, which then manifested itself in the Tea Party, which you don't hear about anymore, which morphed into MAGA and everything else that's happened. So I like to watch it because it gets me nice and angry. It's the way I read the Wall Street Journal's editorial pages. The reported pages are terrific. The reporting, the news there is terrific. The other stuff, the opinion pages all make your blood boil. But I like it. When your blood boils, it means you're ready to go out and do something about it.
I wanted to ask you, what are your top 3 newsletters that you get?
It'd be unfair to call out just one or two because there's so many good ones, but the ones that I tell other people about because they help people, especially on the tech side, the journalism side, media side. There's one called Wonder Tools by Jeremy Kaplan. Kaplan with a C, and he takes tech and explains it, breaks it down, and AI especially does a really good job with that. So I'll point him out. There's another one called Journalist Toolbox by Mike Riley. You don't have to be a journalist to use these, but it'll make you a better consumer of news and a better participant in our news economy, media economy, attention economy. If you read these, I also love reading Liza Donnelly. Liza's a New Yorker cartoonist who has adapted and adopted to the new world. You can think of nothing more classically traditional than a New Yorker columnist, but she has become someone who has taken those skills and applied it to the new world. And among other things, she runs a great Substack. She also does things like live draw at the Oscars and live draw at the Tony Awards and the Grammys and things like that. And I showcase her as someone we can all learn from as we age and are faced with new opportunities, but new roadblocks in our lives, how she was able to transform herself, where a lot of people in the traditional media world would be like, oh, woe is me. She stepped up and stepped forward and has done a really good job of that, and very impressive what she has done.
Thank you. And then just quickly, what's your junk food? What's your kind of favorite thing to get away from it all?
I like watching YouTube Shorts. YouTube Shorts I find is not doom scrolling because almost everything I get are basically clips from Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, The Sopranos. These are the shows that I love, Seinfeld. So somehow I've curated this little engine that only shows me these 4 shows. The growth of YouTube Shorts has been amazing to see what happens. We'll put our read along on YouTube Shorts as well as on regular YouTube, and sometimes it's 100 to 500 times more people watching on YouTube Shorts than they are on regular YouTube. But I'll say one word about YouTube in general. Like during the pandemic, I said, one of my hashtags is always be learning, that we should all learn new skills. And I decided to learn how to make YouTube videos. Oh my God, they're so tough. To get people to subscribe to your YouTube channel requires enormous fortitude and luck, because people treat their YouTube subscription different than a Twitter follow or an Instagram follow. They really care. They're curating their YouTube world. And also partly whatever you subscribe to shows up on your big TV with your family. So they're very careful about that. So to reach my first 1,000 followers on YouTube took forever, whereas I have tens of thousands on other platforms. It just showed me how hard it is, and my respect for these youngins who really have mastered YouTube and are able to get you to subscribe and hit the notification button. It just went up dramatically.
Thinking about subscribing, Sree, where can our listeners find you and your insights? What are a couple? I know there are many places. Give us the top ones.
Well, the main thing I'd love everybody to do is go to our Substack, sreenet.substack.com. And the reason is that we are experimenting there to not just do my talk, my newsletters, which will always be free, my core newsletter. I don't believe if you're trying to change people's minds to then ask them for money. It doesn't make sense. If you've ever seen Jehovah's Witnesses or other people when they're standing on the street, they don't ask you for money before they try to convert you, right? They just bring you in. So I don't believe that should happen for that. By the way, the biggest people at the New York Times upset in the early 2000s about the Times moving to a paywall were people like Maureen Dowd, Nick Kristof, Tom Friedman, because they're in the job of converting souls, right? And to convert people, you have to let them read your stuff. So my main newsletter will always be free, but we're blessed to have paid subscribers now for whom we are now able to give a lot more content, including we created a channel, a newsletter called OK TV. You all know Prestige TV, Peak TV. Well, what about just OK TV? Netflix just creates so much content that we all watch endlessly. So we created that. We're going to do much more stuff on there. So I'm very grateful for everybody who either subscribes for free or for the paid versions. And then I would direct you to my Twitter account because I like the pain.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Thanks so much for joining us, Sree. It was great to have you.
Thank you. And it's so great to be in a conversation that's not just one-on-one. You get so many different perspectives coming at you, and I love that. So thank you for that too.
Appreciate it.
This has been another episode of CAPTivated. It's been hosted by CAPT. You know, CAPTivated. You guys get it. It's the Center for American Political History, Media, and Technology.
The ideas presented by individuals on the podcast are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent Purdue University, which adheres to a policy of institutional neutrality.
To learn more about this episode's guest, check out the show notes. We really enjoyed this conversation today, and we hope you got something out of it too. Thanks for listening.